$10 billion space already is really a $30 or $40 billion space if you can get through to those patients. And it's a fatal disease, so there's a lot of patients missing these therapies when it comes to that. So there's a huge opportunity here.
Welcome back inside our proactive newsroom, and joining me now is Wayne Paterson. He is the CEO of Anteris Technologies. And Wayne, it's great to see you again. How are you?
Doing great, Stephen. Good to see you.
Yeah, so exciting news out from the company. You've enrolled your first U.S. patient in this trial that you're doing for your heart valve. Before we talk about that part of it, let's remind everyone a little bit about this valve and what makes it so unique.
Yeah, thanks. So I think this is probably the culmination of a journey of about 9 years. It started with a blank sheet of paper. I think that's critically important because everything in it lately feels like we're moving so quickly, but there's a lot of backstory here. I think the critical issue here is that we, way back when we entered the space for the treatment of aortic stenosis, a fatal disease where there's no drug, and you basically treat this disease by switching out a piece of the anatomy. There were two incumbent players. It's a large market. And essentially, there was a clinical gap that we observed, and we're able to develop the first new design of valve in this space in about 25 years. And it does give significantly different results as a result of that design change. So going through the development program, obviously you go from concept like that, working out whether you can achieve something that is better, and if you can't, you don't go. You basically shut up, shop store. And then going from bench to animals to cadavers into those early human patients. Now, we did a lot more human patients before the pivotal study. We could have probably got away with about 50. We did over 120. And the reason we did that was to make sure that we had totally de-risked the clinical profile, make sure we understood this product. In fact, we frankly try to push it to break, treating very, very, very sick patients who would not normally make a trial because they have exclusion criteria with comorbidities. So we feel very comfortable as we entered the pivotal study, which of course is the final study before approval. It's a global study as well, EU and US, so we get FDA and CE. The protocol is a head-to-head protocol, which is really, really important, meaning those patients are randomized to our DurAVR product or the standard of care being Medtronic or the Edwards valve. This is the first registration TAVR study that is head-to-head. And we capture, therefore, in a structured and controlled manner, the competitive data as well. So that's critically important to be able to have those discussions on the podium with factual information that's coming out of a study. So yeah, we got the approval from FDA in November. We started the European arm, and then we had to wait for CMS, which provides the reimbursement for the hospital. So this is a reimbursed study. We get 25,000 USD for the device, but also the procedure and the other products are also paid for. So once the CMS came through, we actually moved in what one of the Wall Street analysts told me was record time to go from CMS approval last week to first patients this week.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You've enrolled your first U.S. patient. So what does that mean? Does that mean they've undergone a procedure? And as you mentioned, you don't know which one it is, right?
I actually do.
Okay.
But look, I mean, no, typically there's a ways to go. Obviously, in this study, it is around about 1,200 patients, so 600 of those will be DurAVR. It will move very quickly from here. There's a huge number of patients out there, firstly. And secondly, there's a huge demand to enroll and recruit in this study, just because of the clinical differentiation is so wide from the competitors, but also the product has been extremely well known by the big centers, frankly, since its inception. Some of them were certainly involved in the development. So it's not like we're having to garner the support or the intent to enroll. So those first patients were enrolled. Obviously, that's not public, but clearly I get the text from the physicians. I understand who was randomized. We don't control that, of course, but I found out what they were randomized to. Very happy with that. And then I get the off-the-table data, which was, I would say, amazing, but that's consistent with all the other data that we've had. And I think important for investors to understand that the DurAVR device, or any TAVR for that matter, is a physical device. You pretty much count on the data that you know prior from other studies. We've had other FDA studies, of course, as being within 1 to 2% of where you're going to land in the pivotal trial. So there's no binary outcomes. There's no mystery here. I'm super excited with the data I've seen already in this trial, and it's certainly consistent with the data we've had in the past.
Okay, and just really quickly, this study, you'll be keeping an eye on these patients for a year afterwards, and you're looking at a number of different parameters within this study.
Sure. That's why it's so exciting because the whole space has been pretty much left without competition for about a decade, and the market share has stayed roughly the same, about 70% to the Edwards device, about 30% to the Medtronic device. And there's a reason for that. They are different technologies. Neither of them really addressed the fundamental causes of the disease or the issues, and neither of them got you basically into the pre-disease state of the objective measurements, which is mean gradient, which is what the physicians asked us to develop if we could when we came at it with a blank sheet of paper. So you've got all of that. On the back of that, there's only about 15 to 20% of patients penetrated out there after a decade. Therefore, a $10 billion space already is really a $30 or $40 billion space if you can get through to those patients. And it's a fatal disease, so there's a lot of patients missing these therapies when it comes to that. So there's a huge opportunity here. Obviously, the product is very well known, very differentiated, and so moving forward, yeah, we've got the 1 year follow-up. That's normal, but we've got secondary endpoints, as you alluded to. So the primary endpoint is non-inferiority. That's simply all-cause mortality, all-stroke rehospitalization. Obviously, with all the patients we've done prior, we know what that looks like, right? We absolutely have a good feel on that. But the secondary endpoints are what's going to be critical when we hit the podiums again and have to, stake our claims around clinical evidence versus the competition with data that's in our trial. And those are hemodynamic superiority. Now, we already, of course, know what that looks like. Left ventricular remodeling, so disease modification. The LV is the side of the heart that pumps the blood through, and that's the part that becomes dysfunctional when you've got stenosis, gets back pressure and leads to heart failure, which is the number one cause of death in these patients. We remodeled and shown remodeling of the LV by about 30% over 6 months so far. That brings you back within a functional range. So that disease modification is really critically important. Laminar flow is so critically important. We are the only product with laminar flow. It's what you have when you're born, of course, when you're healthy. Laminar flow now is implicated to mortality. It's implicated to valve failure. And a lot of other things that we now know about because we have the technology called 4D MRI to measure that. So these secondary endpoints are what we already know. But when you get up there on the podium, you can measure that objectively in a DurAVR valve, a Medtronic valve, and an Edwards valve in the same patient population. You are able to make objective claims around clinical outcomes.
Exciting times ahead, Wayne. Congratulations on this first step in the U.S., and we look forward to continuing to follow this as it develops. Okay.
Yeah, appreciate it. And thanks. And good to see you, Steve.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Wayne Paterson, the CEO of Anteris Technologies.